Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5. Now, this wasn't due to separation, right? You guys weren't like, no, just kidding. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be 18 times if you counted the times you guys were mad at each other. You'd have to double that, yeah. Yeah, recount, yeah. All right, Proverbs chapter 5. I'm also going to read a verse in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 as well. Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 18. Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as a loving hind in a pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. In verse 9, live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun. All the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou hast taken under the sun. Again, what I'm focusing on there is live joyfully with your wife. And so let's go ahead and have a word of prayer and begin our last session here for this conference. Father in heaven, Lord, I love you. Lord, I thank you for your word. I ask your blessing now upon this session. Please work, Lord. I pray that you'd fill me with your Spirit. Lord, control what I say and how I say it, Lord. Again, thank you, and I pray and ask all this in Christ's name. Amen. Again, one of the keys to enjoying marriage, besides what we've already talked about, is intimacy. And intimacy doesn't always mean the physical, sexual side of the relationship, but there's also very much a spiritual application to this, an emotional application to this as well. When the intimacy is strong in all three of those phases, you're usually going to find a marriage with joy in it. When all three of those are together, you just won't see one that's not a happy marriage at that point in time. But when any one of those three are broken down, now you're going to begin to see struggles within a marriage, and a marriage that only has some peaks and a whole lot of valleys. They'll have some good times in the marriage, but for the most part, it's just not all there. So intimacy is really important. One of the greatest demonstrations of that, of course, was when I was in Papua New Guinea. There was virtually no intimacy between the couples. I don't mean that they didn't have physical sexual relations. They did, but even in that aspect, including the emotional and the spiritual, it just wasn't right. There was no real intimacy between the couples. It was almost like something they had trouble even relating to at all levels. And again, one of the most graphic displays I had was during the mass wedding I did. When we were doing again, I didn't know exactly how they got married or who was married to who, so I married everybody. Everybody who was a couple, you're going to get married, so we have God's blessing on our church, and we just don't have people shacking up in God's eyes. So every couple taught on the family for several weeks. They all knew what was coming. We're going to finish this with a wedding, and everybody's getting married. And that way you don't have sin in your church, so I figured it'd be the easiest way to cover that base. And so it's the day before that, and we're doing the rehearsal. We're doing the rehearsal because I'm going to do vows. I actually bought every single couple a ring. Each spouse, I went and bought a ring. They're going to have rings for this thing and everything. And so we're going through the vows, and so I had all the couples lined up. Husband and wife here, and they're all just going all the way down. And so we're going through this. And so we're going through the vows, and how I did it was I basically went couple to couple. I still wanted it somewhat intimate for them. I went couple to couple. And I just did it fairly quickly. And so as we're going through this, I got the husbands and wives, they won't look at each other. So I would tell them, you have to look in her eyes. And they'd look at me. And no, look in her eyes. And they would try it. And it was fascinating. They would look up. It was way too intense. You could see it. It just wasn't going to happen. And I was literally trying to force it now. I had some authority there as the missionary, so I'm telling him, you need to look in her eyes. And they couldn't do it. These are people that really have, and these aren't like brand new couples we're putting together. These are couples that have children together. 5, 6, 7 kids. They can't look each other in the eye. There was no intimacy. They couldn't relate. It was way too intense. I remember the very first wedding I did there. And it's the day of the wedding. The rehearsal went fairly good with that. Though the wife, the bride here, was ready to die. And so right before the wedding starts, the groom comes to me and says, she's not going to kiss me. And I said, what? She said, yeah, she just can't do that, not with everybody here. He said, can she hug me? And I said, yeah, if that's what we got to do, she can hug you. And so they hugged. That's what they ended up doing. But the intimacy was just lacking. And it was at all phases of the marriage. I mean, literally, from the three elements we're talking from, the sexual side, the emotional side, the spiritual side, that closeness, what was needed, wasn't present. And that was an enormous problem I had my entire time in New Guinea, is trying to get joy into the marriages, trying to establish, to get the marriages right. I mean, especially if I even want to get somebody to be able to pastor the church, he has to have a right marriage biblically. And to try to change their mindset on that, it was difficult. And you can face it. I mean, we don't struggle as much with intimacy as they do, but it is. Just try and take some time to look right into your spouse. Don't do it right now. Right into your spouse's eyes, without laughing or giggling, but just being serious about it. You know, there's something about that anyhow. So anyhow, intimacy is a must for marriage to have joy. Intimacy feeds the desire to meet the other person's needs. All right? That's what's going to help drive you to that end. So anyhow, let me get into this a little bit. Let's get into the definition, what we mean by intimacy. The word means a closeness, a friendship, affinity, affection, confidence with a person, as well as the physical side as well. It's also, of course, a term referring to the sexual side of a relationship. God created us to desire intimacy. It's in us. Men need it, ladies need it. It's part of who we are, the way that God created us. And God even allowed Adam to see that need of closeness before he presented Eve to him. He wanted him, again, what he was doing was it was a great help to Adam's marriage. You know, instead of just having Eve right there, he let him experience loneliness so that he would appreciate Eve. He wanted him to go through that emotion. And he did just that. God created us for that. Adam knew he was alone, then God created Eve, and that met his need for intimacy. They were one flesh, they had a closeness. Even the very word used for sex there speaks of an intimate way where Adam knew Eve. Really an amazing word when you think about it when it comes to sexual relations. How he knew her. It really speaks to the dynamic of the sexual relationship between a husband and wife, and how it has to be based on intimacy, on a closeness. Again, this is where your relationship with your spouse, when the intimacy is right. It's close. You two are best friends. There's a strong sexual relationship within the marriage. And again, so what I want to do now is take a look at the three different areas where the intimacy is important. First of all, spiritually speaking. And husbands, you're going to be key to all these things. You're the key to all these things. And then when it comes to the spiritual side of the house, of course, it needs to be worked on by both the husband and the wife equally, but the husband is the key to it. And this one is perhaps one of the ones that is most often neglected, even in Christian homes, is the need for a spiritual intimacy between the husband and the wife. And so ways you can develop spiritual intimacy within your marriage, of course, one we talked about in the last session, that's pray together. Pray together. You know, you'll be amazed, even in this room, of how many of us would struggle to pray with our spouse. Just like they had trouble looking in the eyes with each other. Where at night before you go to bed, you grab your spouse and your wife and say, "Let's pray." Not only praying together, but also praying for your spouse will help develop the spiritual side of the house. You should have a strong prayer time, and a prayer time that includes praying for your husband or praying for your wife. This should be a major component of your prayer time. praying for their specific needs. You know, the wife praying for the husband and what he's facing at work and what he's going through and the wisdom he needs, and being specific about it, not just in a little generic prayer for your spouse. You know, the husband praying for the wife as she's at home or doing work that she's doing, or with the children and homeschooling your children, and praying for wisdom there and strength. I think it's important in the marriage that each see each other praying. All right? On a private prayer time as well, where the other spouse sees the other spouse praying. I think another way to strengthen the spiritual intimacy in a marriage is to talk about spiritual things. Have a common place to be able to talk about spiritual things within your marriage. Ask each other about your devotions. You know, wives, if you have a question about your devotions, go to your husband. You say, well, he's not going to know. Go to him anyhow and ask him. Go to him. Ask him about it. Talk about things. Husbands, you know, talk with your wife about your devotional time. And again, I think getting in the habit of talking about spiritual things will help. You know, along those lines, you know, talk about the sermons. Don't talk about the preacher or how much you didn't like the sermon, but no, talk about those things. You know, bring it up in conversation. And you know, and right now, if you're thinking, I don't know that we could do those things. Listen, you're lacking a key component of your marriage, and that is spiritual intimacy. That ability to be close at that level. And you say, well, how do we get through that? You start. Do you understand? You start. You trust God and you start doing it. Again, you plan and you plow for success. Don't think why it can't be done. Think why it can be done. And you do it. And again, don't talk how much you dislike the preacher. My wife does that every Sunday when we get in the car when we're leaving. Worship together. Worship together. Whenever that is possible, worship together. Whether that's of course, at church. You know, have time to worship together. And if you can, ministry-wise, serve God together. All right? Serve God together. Try and combine yourself with your service to God. And like for me, I have Mary Ann prepare all my messages. So that's how we... All right, secondly, emotional intimacy now. And husbands, again, you're the key to this. And this one is extremely important for the wife. And again, the saying is very true. If your wife isn't happy, nobody's happy. All right? And this one I think is very important for the wife, whereas the physical side is going to be more important for the husband. But this is very important for the wife right here. And that is that the emotional intimacy is in place. And again, a strong spiritual foundation, by the way, is going to feed these other two in the right direction. It'll feed these other two in the right direction. It'll take the emotional intimacy in the direction it needs to go as well. And along these lines, so again, I believe this comes from the emotional side of the house here, from quality time with your spouse. All right? Not just time, but quality time with your spouse. It doesn't have to be an exorbitant amount of time necessarily, but it does have to be right time with your spouse. And this is where, again, fellas, listening becomes important. You know, and when you're talking to her, no, look her in the eyes. When she's talking to you, look her in the eyes. It shouldn't be like this. Uh-huh. Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, I got you. Boy, she thinks you're so devoted. Man, she's just head over heels for you. Yeah. Just wait till she throws that phone across the room. So look her in the eyes and listen. Again, don't get into that mode of fixing things. Sometimes just listen. If she wants you to fix it, she's probably going to let you know. Let her get to the point where she actually says, what do we do to fix this? All right? Or what do you think we should do? Let it get to that point. If not, just listen. It's going to help her it's going to draw an emotional intimacy within the marriage. So again, listen well. Different ways to develop emotional intimacy with your wife. One, send her flowers. So Stan sent flowers Do you mind if I ask why? Was it just because?
She was having a bad day. She gave me a list of stuff to go get from the store.
And so you got flowers as well, is that right? And did that put a smile on your face when you saw flowers in there, you had a bad day? It's a great thing to do, brother. Excellent. And you know, you'd pray for her. Do something like that you know she would like. I don't know what you just said, but I'm not asking. And Mrs. Roach informed me they do not have arguments. They have personality conflicts. That's all they have. Another way you can develop this, this one might sound odd, but listen, it's true. Give her public praise. Give her public praise. All right? In front of others. In front of others. That's what it means by public. All right? Don't just say, oh, I walked out the side this morning and was talking how good she was. No, public praise for your wife. Thirdly, compliment her. Compliment her. Tell her she's beautiful. Fourthly, help around the house. That's why you're in counseling, brother. No.
Why the house is a wreck.
Yeah. All right, so help around the house. Number 5, have manners. Have manners. You know, be respectful around her, have manners, pull out her chair, doors, all that stuff. You know, to you, you might not think that's a big deal and you just blow that off, but I'm telling you, the absence of it will affect the emotional intimacy of your marriage. It's the way she is built. Number 6, and this is a big one, especially if you have kids, husbands, give her time to rest. She is homeschooling all those kids, going through all that. Give her a time for a break. Give her time to rest. All right, on to physical intimacy now. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 13. Man, I got to get through this quick. Next year we will extend it. We'll learn a lot from this year, what to prepare for next year. And I'm not going to read them, but included in this is the same verses we were at yesterday in 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 4, dealing with, again, with sexual relations within a marriage, and that even goes on even more within 1 Corinthians chapter 7, dealing with the physical relations between a man and a woman. But right now, Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Now, sex is obviously great and it's a wonderful thing, and it's when it's in its biblical context. All right? And this area, again, this area is going to be attacked in your marriage. It has been the downfall, perhaps the greatest downfall of marriages is something on the sexual side, something related to that somehow. Again, the physical is important for both the husband and the wife, but I would say it's certainly more important for the husband than it is the wife, although it's important for both. We get a glimpse of the wonders of physical intimacy, of course, in the Song of Solomon. It's an amazing book, filled, putting the sexual relations between a husband and wife in just an amazing language, a veiled language, and it really is incredible to go through. Satan knows the importance of your physical intimacy within the marriage. So it's going to be attacked. You're naive to think that it's not going to be. It's going to be attacked. Again, I mentioned this yesterday, and it's very true. You know, the devil will spend most of his time before your marriage trying to get you to have sex, trying to get you to commit fornication. But as soon as you have those vows intact, that's going to change. His game plan now is going to be just the opposite. He's going to want that to cease. He's going to want to try and end the physical relations within a marriage. And again, once physical intimacy is not in its right place in the marriage, the joy will be gone. All right? You're not going to be able to enjoy your marriage as God intended when this is intact. Again, you show me a sexless marriage and I will show you a joyless marriage. Unless God's grace is interceding because of some different medical issues and things like that. There is something wrong when a married couple can go weeks without intimacy. The marriage is in trouble. And I'm not, it's kind of funny now when I listen to different things how all of a sudden pastors have become the experts on the field of sex. It really is, I think it's pride-based and everything else. And so I'm not about to come up here and tell you how frequent it should be, but I do know this, it should be frequent. It should be often and it should be frequent. There's something wrong if you can go an extended time frame and that's not important in your relationship. There's something wrong there. And again, there are times when there are real physical factors involved, and of course God's grace will come in during those times and the marriage can continue having just as much joy as before. Even biblically, when we get into 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're not going to turn there. The Bible is very clear. It said, listen, if you're going to go without sex in your marriage, you need to, one, make this a time of even prayer and fasting, where it's a set time, where you have decided, listen, we're going to end this at this time frame. And he says, and he wanted you to put an end on it because he knew how dangerous that could even be. And again, I believe husbands are certainly key to this. Again, a key all along with every aspect of a relationship is meeting the other's needs. That also carries over into the bedroom, of meeting the other's needs. I think that's important to having the joy and having this relationship right, just like it is in every other aspect of our relationship with each other. And of course, there's differences in how we respond to each other physically. A guy just has to be in the room. The wife has to be in the mood. I've got myself in trouble. We can be in the middle of the argument. I can tell her, I know how we can end this argument. And she usually disagrees with that at that time. That's usually not how we're going to end up ending that argument. But I know a pastor, I would not do this. This is how he counsels. Independent fundamental Baptist pastor. I think he's crazy. But he says whenever, the very first session with any married couple, he said it's very quick. He says they might start off telling me things. I said, just stop now. He says, leave here, go and have sex the next 7 days, every day, then come back and we'll talk.
I need counseling.
Now, let me talk why he was crazy and wrong, brother. Although it's... The problem is, a lot of times he's going to be veiling other problems with the physical side there that might be present. But I do understand the point that he was making with that, because that does change behavior. There's certainly God has designed us when it comes to sex and how it's even rewarded within the marriage. Again, I read this once, I don't know when, a while ago, and it said that guys are more like a microwave. You just got to push the button. But ladies are more like a crock pot. It's something that takes a much longer process here. Really, it starts much earlier in the day when you're helping out around the house a little bit and leaving little notes and things like that. And all that, again, will play in every aspect of your relationship with it. And so it's certainly, a critical issue when it comes to the marriage. And again, men, if you've been meeting her emotional needs and serving your wife, that's a major part in laying the foundation for the physical intimacy side. If you haven't been meeting her emotional needs, this area is going to struggle in your marriage. It's going to struggle. So you got to lay the right foundation for this. And guys, it's dangerous to think that you've earned the right to sex just because you're married to her. Now, there's a certain truth in that. I'm not going against that. But you're setting your marriage up for failure if you think just because you're married, you have the right to it now. When we look at how God designed us, the theology behind this, God designed us differently. God actually designed you so that you would maintain a certain aspect of decent behavior to earn the right. To earn the right. Nor does that mean, no, ladies, that gives you the right, because I also think that's very dangerous, to refuse your husband's advances. I think that's dangerous to set. Again, I believe it helps keeps our behavior right towards each other's, and it helps you to meet your wife's emotional needs. And husbands, make yourself attractive to your wife. And for us, don't go get makeup on, Stanley. You don't have to do that. There's nothing helping your physical appearance. And so what we mean by that is, because guys are the ugliest things on the planet, basically, what we mean by that is be a man of honor. Be somebody she can respect. And that'll carry over into the bedroom. That'll carry over into the bedroom. Be responsible. Meet her needs. And then, and with that, as you're meeting her needs, again, we meet, let me stress this. You meet her needs emotionally, regardless if she's meeting your needs physically. I'm going to say that right now. But now, having said that, you will find that you'll be rewarded much greater when you're meeting her needs emotionally. And then, I can't even say this. When you are meeting her needs emotionally, it's going to be rewarded to you much more so physically. With it is. And again, I think the key is, and I think you have to get in the danger of familiarity. Spice things up at times. You can do different things like this. I got Marianne this shirt. It's her favorite shirt now last year. And I like it. She does not wear this outside of the house. But it's just to spice things up. Can you read that? And so it'll put a smile on her face, every day that she wears it. She wears it every day. Again, intimacy and sex is developed by the desire to meet your spouse's needs. You can have sex without intimacy, all right? You can have that, and that's where many marriages are. The key to having it right is where intimacy is involved, where the spiritual needs are being met. I remember I read one guy, and I don't recommend this, and I don't do it. He talked about, was it a preacher? I can't remember now, about praying before he has sex with his wife. And I don't know why I'm not going to do that, especially after I read how because then he went and said what he prays. He says, I'm not kidding. He says, Lord, I thank you for what I'm about to receive. Well, most people say that before they eat dinner or something like that. And so now that stupid thing's stuck in my head. Every time I hear that prayed before somebody eats dinner, I go back to what that preacher was praying. And now you're all going to have the same problem I have right now, everybody in this room. Now there's certain dangers to intimacy in the marriage. So that's what we need to discuss, because again, you can still have the sexual relations in your marriage, but without intimacy. So if the devil can't get it to, he knows, because of the drive of men and women, he knows his likelihood of getting it to the sex in the marriage to stop is unlikely. Although he certainly does succeed at that. All right, he does. So he attacks it at another angle, and that is to remove the intimacy. Because sex has a great purpose. It's just not about the actual pleasure of it, although God has given it for that. It's also the closeness and the bond that it is produced. But if the intimacy isn't part of the sex, that element does not take place during sex. It's not there. And that's one of the greatest things of it, is the intimacy that is to be developed with sex. And so here's some dangers to dangers to intimacy. Number one is sexual sins. All right? One of the biggest dangers we have today is pornography. What the pornography will ruin within the sex life in your marriage is your intimacy within it. It gives you a wrong view of sex. It allows you to see sex apart from a relationship, if you will, that it's separate from it. That you don't really even have to develop the relationship with your spouse for sex. It becomes about the act itself instead of the person you're with. When that takes place, the intimacy is gone. And you'll find yourself not enjoying it nearly as much. And your spouse certainly will not be. And again, this is it's a lie that the devil is selling today that's trying to destroy marriages. What it does is it turns the sex into being self-centered instead of the whole idea of marriage, of meeting each other's needs, of meeting the other's needs. So again, sexual sins, pornography, look out for that. Number two, unforgiveness. Unforgiveness. I mentioned before that we want marriage to stay together not out of law and out of love. Well, it's very true when it comes to sex. You want it to be based in love and not out of law. You don't want it to be, I don't think there's a husband in the world that would simply want it because, all right, well, I have to do this, so let's do this. Really? But there's a danger there. And one thing that feeds that is unforgiveness. Holding on to something. So what the one spouse will do then will cut off the intimacy in the marriage. The sex still might be there, but the intimacy that's involved with it is gone. It's not present. Familiarity. Do things again that keep the relationship fresh. I've talked about this a little bit already. Maintain the desire to woo your wife, to win her. Same thing for the husband. Keep that going. That will transfer over into the bedroom. Again, that even goes back to the thing, don't just think you've earned the right because you're married. Familiarity can be dangerous. It can lead to the grass is greener on the other side. And another danger to intimacy is this, and that is when a crisis hits a home. When a crisis hits the home, dealing with that is not easy. It can certainly lead to problems. And by crisis, I mean different things. A major move can disrupt it. A major move. A child who dies or is very sick. A loss of a job. Really anything that changes the dynamic of how the relationship is currently established. And those happen in life. We're all going to go through those times. It's during those times, though, that you have to look out for the intimacy at all levels in your marriage to keep it right. And when something changes it, look out. When me and Marianne, me and Marianne experienced this within our marriage when we moved to Papua New Guinea. And it came about in a way that neither of us really saw coming. Now, let's go all the way back to debutation. All of a sudden, we're in a house, we are established here, and we move into a motorhome. And so our world completely changed. We went from a 2,000 square foot home to a 180 square foot motorhome, full-time, with 4 kids in the motorhome with us at all times. It changed the dynamic of the relationship. And at the same time, as soon as I started debutation, I went back to school full-time while we were traveling as well. Another dynamic was entered into the equation. And then, 18 months later, we pick up and we move to the jungle. And our world, both of us, we're just completely upside down. Culture shock is taking place. And as I would say, it was probably about year 2 or 3 where we began to recognize the intimacy had changed within our relationship. I think it was Marianne who had come to me, and she's talking about how things had changed. We're in the jungle. She said, you went on and finished all this schooling now, and how we related to each other was different. And I remember when she left my office, and my office was underneath our house at that time, I sat there and I thought, she's right. And I've even noticed. And so there's a danger there. You have to be on guard for these things. All right? And so when a crisis comes in, that can be the most dangerous, because that's the one that brings the changes in subtly. All right? And it can happen over a time frame. And here's where the devil will play you. He'll set you up like a chessboard. All right? When he begins to see the intimacy is changing, just wait. Like we talked last night, wait for that war against your soul, because it's coming. All right? Because it's coming. Again, even at that time in our marriage, we weren't fighting. I mean, it was normal, the normal disagreement. There wasn't an elevation in that taking place. But nonetheless, the closeness. I mean, a lot of things had changed. We were in the States. I could pick her up and take her to a restaurant. I could order flowers for her and have them sent to her. In New Guinea, I could do none of those things. There was no restaurant to take her to. And what I needed to do is get more creative with those things. But again, our world was upside down. We're doing things. And so the intimacy that was needed for the relationship, wasn't nearly as strong as what it should have been, until we recognized and said, all right, well, this is something that we have to work on. Again, so that's certainly an important thing, to develop that intimacy within the marriage and be looking out for the dangers that are there. I need to wind this thing down. Listen, if you're going to enjoy your marriage, these 3 things have to be present. The spiritual side of the house, that intimacy. So begin to think to yourself, all right, what do we need to develop more in our marriage for that one to grow? And then the emotional side of the house. Guys, you're the key to that one. All right, really, to all these, it is going to be you. You are the key to these things. And then in the physical side are things you need to change. Has sex just become about sex instead of the person that you're with? All right, change it. Put things into practice even within the bedroom that will allow for the intimacy to develop. And then go from there. All right, I'm going to conclude this now. I hope this was a help to you. I'm looking forward to it next year. And I hope as a result of this, again, what I've given out here, like I said in the last session, is simply the game plan. I've given you the game plan. If you're not going to implement it, it's not going to help you. It's not going to help. But if you implement it, it'll help. It will change things, okay? But both of you need to be ready to plow. Be ready to work at your marriage. And right now, your marriage might be great, and I hope it is, but you don't know what you're going to face in 2017. You don't know what you're going to face in 2017. All right? You don't know what's going to come about. So, again, have these things in place. All right, let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer.